Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Let's get started. So first of all, thank you for taking the time, both here physically in Singapore and virtually on the Zoom conference. My name is Zenon Capron, and I'm part of Capron Asia, and we are the organizing partner for this, the Pacific Islands FinTech Innovation Challenge, along with UNCDF. Today, UNCDF is represented by Yenlin, who's based in the Pacific Islands, and will be able to tell us a little bit more about the background. The structure of the session today we'll present for the first 15 or 20 minutes, just to give you an idea of the challenge and the problem statements that we're working on, and then we'll open up the floor for questions for anybody to ask. So please do, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. And then obviously here in person in Singapore, as people have questions, we'll be able to answer them in person. As well, this session will be recorded, so we will be making this available to anybody who wasn't able to attend the session in the first place. So to kick things off, I want to pass over to Yenlin De Silva, who is part of the UNCDF team, who will give us a bit of background on the UNCDF program, as well as the challenge itself. Yenlin, I pass over to you. And you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Zenon, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join this session. Just by way of background, my name is Yenlin De Silva. I am the country coordinator for Fiji, stepping in for Ajay Jagannath, who is the technical lead for this initiative, who's currently on travel. So just by way of background to this FinTech challenge, this initiative is undertaken by United Nations Capital Development Fund, which stands for UNCDF, and this intention is to identify problem statements, that is challenges in the Pacific. And to see how we can bring about some solutions into the Pacific through this challenge. So with regard to the initiative, we have basically the Pacific Digital Economy Program, which is under the UNCDF, which is a joint program between UNCDF, UNDP, and UNCTAD. That basically is a joint program. This is sort of the successor program to the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program, which was known as PFIP, which is more looking at sort of financial inclusion within the Pacific. Learning from various lessons, we've now expanded this program to the PDEP, which is the Pacific Digital Economy Program, looking broadly in terms of developing a digital economy program within the Pacific. If you can just move on to the next slide. So this initiative, as I mentioned, is taken by UNCDF, and the sponsoring partners for this program is ADB and MDF. We are basically funded by a donor program, which is Australian Aid and New Zealand. We also have Visa as the knowledge partner for this initiative. And we've also, as Janan mentioned, Capron Asia is taking a lead in organizing this initiative, with also the support from Australian government on Australian Trade and Investment Commission, the Singapore FinTech Association, Monetary Authority of Singapore, as well as the Pacific Island Forum. We've identified a couple of implementing partners, which is Tonga Development Bank, National Bank of Vanuatu, National Bank of Samoa, HFC, FDB, which is Swedish Development Bank, Vodafone, and Solomon Island National Provident Fund. So how we went about this, we had discussions with these implementing partners identified sort of the bottlenecks or the challenges that they're having in terms of various aspects, which Zenon will take us through. And then came about in terms of the problem statements and what possible solutions that we can find to address, which will in effect finally help the financial inclusion in the Pacific. Appreciate if you could go to the next slide. So the uniqueness of the Pacific is the smallness and the remoteness of the countries. As this slide basically shows you a simple comparison of sort of the entire GDP to the countries of US and Australia shows the scale, challenges of scale in these various countries. And the small population and the fragmented market and the limited economic resources, and most countries depending on inward personal remittances is something that is common across the Pacific Islands. And of course, the challenges of technology infrastructure, which is often lacking. And the other sort of challenge is if you see into the various countries in the Pacific, within, although we're showing sort of an average, there is quite a difference in the Pacific Island countries in terms of where, say, for example, Fiji is in terms of their 4G network, as opposed to countries like Samoa and so on. If you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the objective of this challenge is to bring the fintechs, both sort of local and from the region and globally, to adopt digital finance, sort of promote the adoption of digital finance in the Pacific Islands, to deploy digital finance solutions, provide market access to fintechs, which as a new market for some of the fintechs, and also with on the ground sort of support that can be provided by UNCDF. We will be able to connect the fintechs with the various market regulators and various partners. So basically, it is to identify, to bring the problem statements, and then to find solutions to attract the fintechs through this challenge by basically giving sort of a what you call a grant scheme. Thanks, Zenon. So I'll move on to Zenon to discuss about the problem statements. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Yemen. So along the lines of what Yemen mentioned, where there were predominantly 5 problem statements that we identified as the key challenges that we'll focus on within the Pacific region for this FinTech challenge. The first problem statement is concerning access to financial products and services. And so you'll notice as we go through these, there is the problem statement, there is the ask, and then there is the geographical focus. This one in particular is applying to 3 different geographies, Tonga, Samoa, and Vanuatu. So although the challenge in each of these countries varies slightly, the idea behind them and the fundamental challenge is very much the same. And this is predominantly around SMEs and access to financing, because many of these SMEs are asset light. They don't have a lot of the traditional characteristics that we would expect in a company to be able to make a credit decision on their ability or their attractiveness as a borrower. So fundamentally, what we're looking for here is two things. The first is a platform or decision engine to assess creditworthiness, particularly in an environment where there aren't necessarily a lot of assets. I mean, you can picture the Singaporean equivalent here might be a hawker center where, you know, they have an oven and a few things, but not very asset heavy. So, to support them in the background and provide creditworthiness is a little bit challenging. So really what we're looking for here is a solution that can take alternative data points, things like utility payments or mobile payments, and use those as proxies for creditworthiness and build into more of a credit scorecard that can be used in each of these countries. And again, in each of those, we have these implementing partners of Tonga Development Bank, National Bank of Samoa, and Vanuatu. So the balance sheets are there. It's really just having the tools to be able to assess the credit of these SMEs, in particular the SMEs. The second ask is around the actual lending solution. So this is looking at, whilst these organizations have lending platforms in place, they may not be as sophisticated. So, we are in particular looking for a FinTech in this case that might be able to cater to both the credit scoring and the loan provisions, or one or the other of the asks. It's also worth mentioning, as there are 3 geographical focuses on this, we are looking ideally for one FinTech that is able to address this problem statement across all 3 of the countries, but we are also open to FinTechs that can only address 1 or potentially 2 of the geographies at once. So there is a bit of flexibility in this particular problem statement. But this problem statement is fundamentally around improving access to financial products and services. The next problem statement is around digitizing customer service. And this in particular is a challenge in Fiji for the Fiji Development Bank, or FDB. One of the challenges that they're facing is the fact that as more people become a part of the formal financial system, there's more challenges in terms of serving them from a customer service perspective. And so really this is around automating some of that customer service, in particularly by putting in automated bots or channels within the, first of all, the digital platform. So either online, on a browser or on a phone, to be able to answer in the first phase simple queries. So this is predominantly static information from the bank about where the nearest branch is, what documents are required to apply for a particular product, or how can I get in touch with somebody from the bank. So to answer kind of static queries and to handle many of those queries that would come into the phone centers or people that would come into the branch to ask the questions for. The second phase of this is looking at a little bit more of a sophisticated solution. So the FDB is in the process of implementing a new core banking system that will be much more modern with APIs and much more advanced basic technology infrastructure as compared to what they have currently. And so within that core banking system, there will be more functionality available and the potential of including more customer related data into the chatbot solution. So this could be things like booking appointments by identifying yourself within the chatbot. At this point, we're a little bit unclear about how much account level information we'll be able to share through the chatbot, as obviously there are personal data protection and authentication measures that have to be in there. But fundamentally, the second phase of this problem statement is looking at how can we personalize the chatbot experience to the individual. So more about storing their queries in a CRM system within the new core banking system, accessing account level information. That's really what this problem statement is about. So again, this is focused on Fiji predominantly, and the challenge here is to address the customer service challenge that they are facing due to the higher levels of customers that the bank is onboarding at the moment. The third problem statement is specific to the Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands has the Solomon Islands National Provident Fund, or SINPF. And this is the national CPF, social insurance retirement fund that the government has set up there. For employers, it is mandatory that the employers contribute to the fund, much like you would see at the CPF here in Singapore, where there's a certain amount of money that comes out of the salary that the employer contributes and the employee contributes. The challenge in the Solomon Islands is that employee contributions or individual contributions to the fund are not as high as SINPF and the government would like. And largely that comes down to individuals not necessarily seeing the benefits of contributing to the fund. So really what we're focused on here is how do we increase or incentivize the individuals to contribute to the Provident Fund. And really what we're looking at here is the potential of creating a lending facility on the back of the fund. So the idea being that if you're able to contribute to the fund, then you'll be able to borrow against the fund. Now, SINPF has a lending platform in place. So really it's about working with that platform to enable these kind of nano loans. So an example here might be somebody contributes over the course of a year $100 equivalent to the Provident Fund, and then they would be able to borrow against that, like so potentially borrow $50 or borrow $25. So it's the idea of having an incentive for them to save, and then they can then borrow against that. So the ask, as mentioned, is really about creating this nano loan product for both, pretty much for retail in this particular case, because it's those that we're looking to incentivize to save. And the platform should also have an element of credit scoring in that as well, where they're able to capture user behavior in terms of consistency in deposits, et cetera, to be able to assess their credit and then make a decision on how much to lend against that. So again, this is really just focused on the Solomon Islands and predominantly around savings. The fourth problem statement is around streamlining foreign exchange. The foreign exchange is a challenge within the Pacific Islands domestically and obviously cross-border. I mean, cross-border remittances are a big part of the financial ecosystem, as there is a large Pacific Island diaspora that lives in places like New Zealand and Australia that is constantly remitting funds back to the Pacific Islands region. Now, the fees for those remittances are quite high, 5 to 8% as compared to kind of a global average of 3 to 5% in many cases. So the fees are quite high in them. Really what we're looking here though at is a more domestic regional view. So we're looking for a FinTech or a partner to come in and to provide a localized intra-regional foreign exchange clearing platform, which would allow individuals or businesses to go between the Pacific Island currencies without having to pass through a extra regional currency. So in other words, being able to move from Samoa to Solomon Islands without having to go through the Aussie dollar or the US dollar, which obviously adds costs. The implementing partner that we have for this particular problem statement is Vodafone. And so they have the idea of an international money transfer hub concept. And the original or the initial idea of this problem statement is that predominantly we're connecting into MTOs and MNOs in the region. So Vodafone has a digital wallet, as do a few of the other MNOs within the region. And the idea here initially is connecting into that digital wallet. But predominantly here, we're looking for a localized foreign exchange solution that doesn't rely on the Aussie dollar or the US dollar. Now, the idea here as well is that the partner should hopefully be able to support the settlement. So not just the kind of messaging or the coordination on this, but actually the settlement of the currencies as well, which would involve having partnerships with Vodafone and potentially some of the other banks within the region. So that is problem statement number 4. Problem statement number 5 is focused on e-commerce and point of sale transactions, so really digital payments online and offline. Fundamentally, the geographical focus for these two are Fiji and Samoa. In Fiji, the implementing partner is the Home Finance Company, and in Samoa, it is NBS, or the National Bank of Samoa. Really, the problem statement here initially is focused on e-commerce. Many of the organizations, including HFC and NBS, do not have internet payment gateways or any kind of online payment gateway mechanism to accept digital payments online. Although e-commerce is very small in the Pacific Islands, it is growing very rapidly, and it is seen as an opportunity for SMEs and individuals to increase their economic empowerment. So really the initial focus of this is providing a merchant payment solution focused on online payments. Ideally, the solution would also cater for point of sale payments or offline payments as well. So these would be transactions that are settled via card or digital wallet and settled with the local partner banks. We would also be looking for the internet payment gateway to provide capabilities for both domestic payment rails as well as cross-border payment rails. So connecting into the Visa and MasterCard networks to be able to process payments there. So really this is the idea is having a PSP that is able to cater to e-commerce and ideally point of sale payments as well. And then is problem statement number 5. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the problem statements that are here. I'm going to pass back to Yenlin to talk through a little bit more of the details around the challenge. And then in the Q&A, we're obviously willing to take questions around any of the problem statements or anything else that has been covered. So Yenlin, let me pass back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sanan. So one of the objectives of this challenge is to provide fintechs with access to the Pacific markets. As I mentioned, there's a grant up to 50K that will be provided to implement market-ready solutions. So it's not necessarily or like merely the grant funding per se, but also linkages to partners and regulators throughout sort of the process that will be provided by UNCDF. Next slide, please. Thanks. So with regard to the process, the applications are now open and will be closing on the 20th of June. The first round of selections will happen by the first week of July, where we will shortlist 12 applications out of all that's received through the RFA process. The selected 12 finalists will then be taken to a boot camp, which we target to hold between 25th to 27th, hopefully in Singapore, if all things go well, or if not, it might be virtual. So where here at the boot camp, there will be opportunity to interact with the implementing partners and streamline and sort of to refine the solutions further. So the selection of the winners will happen on the last day of the boot camp, and there'll be sort of a panel of judges present at the boot camp. So thereafter, sort of post-implementation completion, we will be definitely supporting the selected fintech companies, which will be 5 to take these solutions live. Next one, thanks. So in terms of the eligibility, it's quite straightforward. The company has to be in operations for 2 years and can be registered anywhere globally. Of course, it has to address at least one of the 5 problem statements given in the RFA. And if any fintech wishes to apply for more than one, they're most welcome to do so. The other important thing is the solutions have to be sort of business ready, and it should not be sort of still in development or testing stage. The application form is available in the e-investment platform. There are formats provided to submit your application. There is a technical proposal, there is a budget and work plan, and a CV format as well. So please ensure that these formats are followed when the application is submitted via the platform. This is sort of the evaluation criteria for the first round of selection of 12 finalists. This is provided in the RFA, so I wouldn't want to go through just through the list any further. Thanks. So this is the criteria that we will be following at the boot camp. Panel of judges, as I mentioned, will be looking at the criteria mentioned here, looking at sort of the market potential and the impact that the solution can make, the revenue potential in terms of the commercial viability, in terms of actually the cost, ongoing cost to the implementing partner, partnership and the technology, and capacity and implementation aspect as another criteria. Thanks. Over to you, Zeman.
Great, thanks, Yanlin. We've had a couple questions in the background. People have said asking about who we should contact after this, or any additional questions that you might have. We do on the screen there. You can send an email to Ajay, and if you CC in Pacific FinTech Challenge at caprinasia.com, that will come through to our team. And we can have questions around that. In terms of follow-up questions, we're happy to open it up to any of the attendees now for any questions that you may have. I think we should be able to allow you to talk too. So if you want to ask the questions verbally, happy to do that as well. And we have a couple of people here in the room in Singapore that may have questions for us as well. But do feel free to ask any questions you may have through these email addresses as well. The biggest question that we get asked so far is around the specific problem statements. So the next level of detail from the implementing partners. Within the next week or so, we plan on publishing kind of an FAQ that we've gone out and asked each of the implementing partners for their thoughts and additional detail around some of the problem statements. So as we have that available over the next week, we will share that with everybody that was on this call today. So if you do have any questions, please use the raise your hand functionality within Zoom, and we can allow you to talk. But maybe let me start with here in the room in Singapore, if any of the people that have attended this in person have any questions that we can answer.
So are you open to joint applications, joint bids?
So the question, just for everybody on the line, was, are we open to joint applications? Yenlin, are you able to answer that?
Yes, joint applications are welcome. There is a criteria that is mentioned in the RFA as to how it could be submitted.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There's another question that came through is if we will email this pack to all attendees today. Yes, we will. We have all of your emails that you submitted, so we will send this through by the end of the day to everybody, a PDF of this presentation. If for some reason you don't receive it, again, send us a note. But if you have registered, then say by 2 o'clock Singapore time, it should be in your inbox. Any other questions? Okay, great. I think from our side, that's pretty much it. Yenlin, did you have any additional comments?
Nothing further, Zenon.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for your time today and attending this. We're very excited by this and are looking forward to working with all of you on this. This is a very big opportunity. I think, the Pacific Islands is facing a lot of challenges around this. We do have high level engagement from both organizations like the MAS here in Singapore, as well as the central banks around the Pacific Islands region. So this is a really good opportunity for all of you to showcase your solutions to the market and hopefully find a viable solution that fits for some of these challenges. So with that in mind, thank you all for attending today. Please do reach out if you have any other questions, and we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.